For decades, the waters between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago were defined by cooperation more than conflict. Shared seas, shared energy interests, and shared migration routes made these two neighbors natural partners. But in December 2025, something changed, suddenly and sharply, turning that long-standing relationship into a diplomatic flashpoint with far-reaching implications for the entire Caribbean. To understand how we arrived at this point, we must trace a series of events that connect global power politics to regional stability and to a single ship, the oil tanker Skipper. On the 10th of December 2025, U.S. forces seized the oil tanker Skipper in the Caribbean Sea off the coast of Venezuela. The United States had sanctioned the vessel because it was allegedly involved in transporting Venezuelan crude that was subject to U.S. sanctions. The operation involved multiple U.S. agencies, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Homeland Security, and the U.S. Coast Guard. The crew did not resist, and there were no casualties. Venezuela condemned the action as an act of international piracy. This seizure was remarkable not merely because it involved the forcible boarding of a commercial tanker in international waters. It was amazing because it was widely seen as a significant escalation in the United States pressure campaign against the government of President Nicolas Maduro. By targeting a vessel carrying Venezuelan crude, the mainstay of Caracas's economy, U.S. authorities struck at the heart of the country. Its ability to finance its government and provide basic goods and services to its people. The fallout began immediately. Including family members of President Maduro and multiple companies and tankers allegedly involved in moving crude. A week later, on the 16th of December 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump announced a complete and total blockade of sanctioned oil tankers entering or leaving Venezuelan waters, a move intended to choke off Venezuelan oil revenues and pressure Caracas further. For Venezuela, these measures were not abstract policy decisions made in Washington. They were devastating blows to an economy that has long relied on oil exports for more than 90% of its foreign earnings. Losing control over tanker traffic and seeing vessels seized or blocked on the open sea struck not only at economic stability, but at national pride and sovereignty. But the crisis did not stay confined to the U.S. and Venezuela. Within days, Caracas began to look around for what it believed were broader networks supporting its actions, and it inevitably landed on its nearest neighbor, Trinidad and Tobago. Geography matters in this story. Trinidad and Tobago lie just 7 miles off Venezuela's eastern coast. Its ports, airports, and airspace are among the closest Western Hemisphere infrastructure to the South American mainland. For decades, this proximity facilitated energy cooperation, cross-border commerce, and migration. But once U.S. military operations intensified in the southern Caribbean and the tanker seizure occurred, Venezuela began to draw connections, whether proven or not, between U.S. operations and Trinidad and Tobago's role in the region. On the 15th of December 2025, Venezuelan authorities publicly accused Trinidad and Tobago of complicity in the U.S. seizure of the Skipper. Caracas alleged that Port of Spain had effectively enabled U.S. actions. by allowing American military forces access to airports within Trinidad and Tobago, access that, according to Venezuelan officials, supported the broader U.S. enforcement activities against Venezuelan oil shipments. Venezuela's government framed this as participation in the theft of Venezuelan oil. These accusations have been strongly denied by the leadership of Trinidad and Tobago. On the 17th of December 2025, Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar stated that Trinidad and Tobago was not involved in any U.S. blockade or military operation against Venezuela, and that her government had received no requests from Washington to assist in such actions. She emphasized that Port of Spain's cooperation with the United States is focused on regional security issues such as drug trafficking and human trafficking, not hostile actions against Venezuela. Despite the denial, Venezuela did not wait for clarification. Instead, Caracas responded with a swift diplomatic and economic backlash. On the 17th of December 2025, Venezuela announced the termination of all existing contracts, agreements, and discussions related to energy with Trinidad and Tobago. This included long-standing talks related to cooperation on energy infrastructure, especially projects such as the proposed gas pipeline connecting Venezuelan fields to processing facilities in Trinidad. Venezuelan officials framed the termination as a response to what they perceive as Trinidad and Tobago's alignment with U.S. actions against Venezuela. For Port of Spain, these developments represent a diplomatic crisis with real economic and security implications. Energy cooperation with Venezuela has been an essential component of Trinidad and Tobago's energy strategy for years, and the loss of those negotiations, even temporarily, has unsettled investors and policymakers alike. At the same time, Trinidad and Tobago remains caught in a geopolitical crossfire, not of its own making. The United States justifies its actions by pointing to long-standing sanctions designed to restrict Venezuelan oil revenues and penal-lease entities that circumvent those measures. Washington also emphasizes cooperation with Caribbean partners on transnational crime and narco-trafficking, framing military access arrangements as part of legitimate security initiatives. To Caracas, however, the seizure of the skipper, a tightening blockade, intentionally or not, has drawn small Caribbean states into a larger strategic contest. Beyond energy and diplomacy, there are also human consequences. Trinidad and Tobago hosts thousands of Venezuelan migrants who have fled economic collapse, shortages, and political turmoil in their homeland over the past decade. These communities now find themselves in a precarious position, caught between diplomatic standoffs and policy shifts that could impact their residency status, labor rights, and access to social services. The broader Caribbean watches closely. Regional leaders have called for restraint, emphasizing that tensions between Venezuela and global powers should not destabilize the region. Mexico and Brazil, for example, have both urged diplomatic engagement and greater involvement from multilateral organizations such as the United Nations to prevent further escalation. While the United States continues to defend its actions as necessary enforcement of international sanctions and national security policy. President Trump and U.S. officials have framed the blockade of sanctioned tankers and the seizure of the skipper as part of a campaign to deny revenue to the Venezuelan government and to disrupt illicit networks. Critics, however, argue that such measures risk violating international norms and could undermine regional stability. In this uneasy moment, the islands of the Caribbean are reminded of an old truth. Geography does not merely determine distance, it determines destiny. What happens off the coast of Venezuela does not stay off the coast of Venezuela. It ripples outward, affecting politics, economics, and lives across a region long shaped by forces larger than itself. The story of the skipper, a single ship seized on a December day, illustrates how global geopolitics can intersect with regional relationships. When powerful nations exert pressure through sanctions, blockades, and military operations, neighboring states can find themselves in the middle of disputes, not of their making. For Trinidad and Tobago, relations with Venezuela now face an uncertain future. Whether diplomacy can repair the rupture begun in December 2025 remains to be seen. But one thing is clear: the Caribbean's role in hemispheric geopolitics has grown. And with it, the stakes for small nations navigating a world where proximity can be as dangerous as it is defining.